I guess this has now become a podcast of sorts rather than our Q&A, but that's cool. It's the way it was meant to be, I think. So thank you guys first off for allowing us to show the uh, story of all of these men and women. Um, and welcome if you guys are just joining us. What you guys are listening to, we're sitting down with the editor, Julie. How do you say your last name?
Chalhoub, you're feeding back, just so you know.
Okay. And producer Nancy McBride, who is the filmmakers involved with the documentary Surviving Pulse, Life After a Mass Shooting. We just showed it to our Discord community, and I really love this documentary, first off, and I really wish you guys the best with its distribution, which I know you guys have in the works right now. But I'm kind of curious if you guys can kind of give like an elevator pitch for those that weren't here tonight, but that are listening via podcast.
Sure. In 2016, the Pulse nightclub is an LGBT nightclub in Orlando. We had a mass shooting that had occurred. An individual had gone in and just opened fire on the club goers. We have had over 100 people that were injured. 49 have deceased. And our documentary is based on some of the survivors and the PTSD that comes along with a mass shooting. It's not just one person that gets affected from a mass shooting. Julie had brought this to me when we were really talking numbers one day, and think about how many people. If I lose my brother, for example, it's a wife, it's a sister, it's a lover, it's a best friend, it's a child, it's a sibling, it's a parent. You're talking 5 people plus that are affected times 49 people. We're about 2,500 people that are affected from one mass shooting regarding Pulse. Now, we've had over 343 mass shootings in the U.S. since Pulse. And so you can only imagine that what happens to the people that are left behind. And that's kind of, they're starting the conversation. And that's our goal of our documentary, is to show what happens, where they are 5 years from now, how the PTSD is still there, how they're still struggling. And it's not like you just get cured of it tomorrow. It's a long process for these individuals. Julie, you want to add anything?
No, that pretty much summed it up. The point about when you lose someone, and we came up with a number of nearly 2,500 people, because it's not just those 5 that you mentioned: mother, brother, sister, father, aunt, uncle, cousins. You have coworkers and friends and teammates, and even the therapist who spoke within the film mentioned the ripple effect. That, when you take one life, there's just this ripple effect of all the people. So yeah, you covered that real well. Thank you.
Yeah.
For you guys, before we kind of get into the heavier stuff, the film opens up on kind of exploring the culture and laying and the groundwork for what really Pulse was and like the reputation that it had obtained. And so just kind of being outside of this, just being like an LGBT, friendly club. Can you guys kind of describe the like culture and the feeling of Pulse and like what made it so special?
Pulse embraced everybody. It wasn't just LGBT that went there. My kids went there, and it was just a fun place to go. And that's kind of wraps it up. It's just everybody loved everybody there. Everybody just kind of checked in. It was a friendly environment, and it was just a great place to go. And it didn't matter if you were in the community or not. Everybody loved you, and that was Pulse in a nutshell. And our director is logging in now. She just got off work and she's logging in.
I think she just joined us. Is it Alexa? I got a notification.
Alexa's.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. How are you doing this
Oh my
evening?
gosh, I kept looking to unmute and myself and turn on my camera, and there's no button for that. Give me a sec.
On the
Sorry,
left-hand
guys.
side, it says video on the left-hand
This is a
side.
new platform for me. Hold on, looking for video. Stand by. Turn on camera.
Sure.
It's thinking. It's dancing squares. Oh, please. Captain Nostalgia.
Yeah, Discord takes a few minutes to catch up sometimes.
You know what? That's fine. I'm so sorry I'm late to the party, guys. I'm so sorry. Julie, you look beautiful. Great to see your face.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a lag. She's just
All right.
staring.
Nice
at
to
me.
see your squares.
I know. I'm dancing. Square dancing. It's like Eminem. Round the outside. Round the outside.
While we're waiting on Alexa, and feel free to jump in, Alexa. I'm wondering if you guys can kind of talk about, how the documentary kind of started, and how it kind of came together. I know Nancy had talked about, like, Julie had brought you the story about doing the documentary, but what was it specifically about the story of Pulse that made you guys want to pursue it as a full-length documentary?
That's a great question. Actually, Alicia brought us a story. Brought Nancy the story, and when it first started, I was on another project, and Nancy had gone a different direction. But we learned very quickly the subject matter is super sensitive, and you need to have respect for everyone involved. And where'd you go? There he is.
There, keep going.
Yeah, I think my camera's messed up because I see like tops of heads for everybody on this platform. I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm so sorry. But
Is that why you complimented me?
Because every person deserves a voice, and there's one thing about having a voice, and there's another thing about being heard. These people were left behind, needed help, needed support. Everyone on the front line, not front lines, but media and whatever. Oh, yay, Orlando Strong, this is all great. And then I was like, well, wait a second, you guys. Nobody's getting the help they need, or the support they need, or the mental support they need. No one was getting what they needed. And Nancy was like, this is really important to me. And she told me about what she wanted to do, and I 100% came on board. I thought it was very important because that's where we are these days. Everybody should be able to speak their voice and their truth. Side note, something this horrific happens and you're left behind in the wake of the media and politicians, and we're doing the best for... No, you're not. No, you're not. You can do a lot better. And it was an important story to tell, but we tried not to make it political because we thought it was important that people that don't understand different lifestyles and ways of life, we didn't want to turn them off because we were so concerned about making sure those were the people watching it, so maybe they could learn something and open their eyes a little bit and see what needed to happen and maybe become a part of it. It was very important to me. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Thanks.
I wanted to kind of, like, you brought up like a very valid point talking about the media's involvement. I think when you have something as high scale as what happened at Pulse, the Pulse massacre, you end up essentially... Oh, we lost Nancy.
She'll be back.
You end up essentially, like, you're said it correctly, like, you have the media there on the front lines and they're covering the news as it's happening, but then you never kind of get to see the aftermath because it's not happening in your community, or it's not happening in your town, or you don't have any association. You tend to forget about it. And I was talking a couple years ago with a friend of mine who survived Hurricane Sandy a few years ago, and
Sure.
he had kind of talked about how, like, the media was there in the front lines, and then once a couple months later, it just kind of like they left, but like the people that had felt the effects of the hurricane were still like picking up the reels.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to point out is that when Nancy approached me, she told me some of the stories that they had recorded, and these are not stories that had been heard. So when Pulse first happened and you saw all these news stories, you tended to see all the same people interviewed. And with each anniversary, you see the same people interviewed. And they tend to be Latinos. And it was Latin night at Pulse that night. But that doesn't mean that everybody there was Latin. And so what I did when I started to craft the story, I had to do a lot of research because I didn't want to cut something that had already been told. And these stories definitely had not been told. You couldn't find these stories anywhere else. And so as we're talking about the media coming back and repeating and, you know, or getting lost after the fact, one of the things with this film is it started out with a different name. It was called Forgotten Survivors because these are the people that were forgotten. They are the few. There were 9 Black people, I think, that died in the Pulse massacre, and, you know, others injured, as you saw in the film. But when this became more of a full story, what we decided was that we wanted it to be more well-rounded. The LGBTQ community tends to know what happened. The Black community knows that they've been forgotten. So we wanted to make something that was going to appeal to everyone, that could inform everyone. Because as Nancy pointed out earlier, there have been hundreds of mass shootings since the Pulse massacre. And so when the first part of the film talks about life after a mass shooting, this is what these people dealt with on a daily basis and having to deal with hospital bills and, you know, ongoing surgeries. And then finally, the 5 years later, this is where we still are 5 years later, still need help, and funding has been cut for people who just wanted to dance.
Right.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Messed up.
It's absolutely wild to me, like just watching some of the statistics of how this is. What city does this take place in again?
Orlando.
Orlando. I was gonna say Miami. I always get those two mixed up. But Orlando, the way that you kind of see the like the back and forth with the survivors having to still pay the medical bills, but also at the same time having to fight for that. And then you turn around and the therapy bills kind of get cut and vetoed. That was probably one of the most shocking portions of this documentary to me. And it's the reason why something like Victims and Villains exist, is because we want to deconstruct stigma and push for a almost a restructure of the way that our country looks at mental illness and mental health. And I think you see it. So many of the stories that we see in the last section of the film talk about how, it's 5 years later after the fact, but yet they're still having these flashbacks, or there are certain things that set them off. And I love the therapist that you guys had interviewed in this. She had talked about everyone heals in their own time. The thing about grief and tragedy and PTSD and these traumatic events is that you can never have one size fits all. It's always going to be different for every person. And Keon talks about being able to almost go 2 years without having it, and then just kind of one day it boom.
And he's still struggling today.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't understand. Keon's had over 27 surgeries just to stay alive. Plus, he has more. So he could potentially be into the 30s, and the amount of surgeries he's had. He's struggling a lot because people don't understand why. Like you said, why aren't you healed yet?
Yeah.
Well, I've been
So
shot.
talking about that?
I shot up. I was dead on the table.
Yeah.
And he was in a coma for 2 months before anybody knew he was
Pronounced
there.
dead twice.
Right. So, so you're right. The struggle is there. And Keon, had lost a friend the week that we did our 5-year anniversary. So he was in an emotional place to be on camera. So it was tough. So we pass on his struggles so that people understand he's PTSD as well, and at a really rough spot right now.
But a really good point to what you were saying is we're in a clickbait society. That headline is going to get the click. Click is going to get the money. So you're going to sensationalize every headline. So when something like this happens, it becomes a headline, not a human event. Does that make sense? Like you forget about the people that went through this or lost their life or lost a loved one and the whole thing, and it just becomes sensationalized and then politicized and then dismissed.
Not to mention desensitized. Because
Oh my gosh.
it happens
really.
all the time. It's like,
Absolutely.
another
Right.
one. Where was
Right.
this one? Which one are you talking about?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's just an important story to tell, and it needed to be told. And Nancy and I just ran around like crazy people, trying to get these voices heard, not the headline news, but the stories, and humanize it. We are human beings. We are people, and this is my story. And now you get to hear it. It's not the 10 o'clock news where you get 5 minutes of whatever they want to show you. This is their life, and it's shocking, and it rips my heart out. I still have a hard time when we show it. I still have a hard time watching it because everyone breaks my heart, every one of them. And we need to humanize people again, because like the babysitter, this is the babysitter these days. So where's the humanity? Socialization is lost now because kids would rather, it's an addiction, but would rather stare at a screen and blow things up than go out and go with their friends and play soccer or, something like that. So you're missing so much of the human interaction. And this happened right at the forefront of when all this stuff started happening. So these people need that voice, and we wanted to give them that voice. Does that make sense?
One of the scenes, yeah, one of the scenes that I really think hit me hard is the interview with the gentleman from Gays Against Guns that was talking, and he shows the human being placards, that had
And
all 49 of the victims that died in the massacre. And yeah, I think Alexa, you brought up a great point where we're this clickbait society where we have this tendency to focus on the headlines, and everything moves so incredibly fast that, like, one day it's like we're talking about SpongeBob, the next day we're talking about Jackass, the next day we're talking about Marvel, the next day we're talking about Ariana Grande, and that it just goes on. And some days it's like we're moving through multiple different subjects, multiple different headlines. And the unfortunate part about us seeing society through that way is that those victims end up getting swept up in those clickbaits and end up getting lost in him. And I think that was one of the hardest things about a few years ago with the Black Lives Matter movement that we saw following the death of George Floyd, as well, is that there was so much injustice that was being done. It felt really overwhelming. And I think that when you can deconstruct that and hear those names, these types of stories take on a completely different matter.
thank you for saying that. That's a really astute thing to say, and that was beautiful. And you're absolutely right. And when loss of life becomes politicized, we've got a problem. So all of a sudden, Antifa was born because they needed a scapegoat. There's no Antifa. You don't need. You know what I mean? Like there was an injustice that happened, and instead of acknowledging it and saying that was horrendous, what's going on? Let's fix that problem. It became like us and them, us and them. It's always us and them, and it's heartbreaking because the human lives involved in all these things get lost in the story and the clickbait and like we talked about, the sensationalization. Is that a word? Yeah, sorry, I tangented. But yeah, I agree 100% with what you said. Sure is quiet.
I was waiting to see if anyone else wanted to add anything before I moved on.
I personally felt you guys were right. And what gets really lost is the survivors of the incident, the families and the friends. Nobody who follows up with them, 3 years later, 5 years later, and shows them and realizes how much pain it was actually there. Nobody. And that's what, we need to open up conversation on.
Talk about it.
Yep.
I want to head into probably one of the most predominant figures in the film, and that's Robin Harris, who has been an advocate. Her and Cha-Cha both, they are advocates for justice for this event. And for those that haven't seen this documentary, can you guys kind of explain their role in the film and kind of their journey for justice?
Robin is actually in the ministry, and she was called in by her job to come in and help as people were being shipped to their location. It was another facility that was up the road, and so she was there just to basically counsel and realize just how mass the situation was, and that was her call to to do something, to step in. And then she realized that she knew people that were there, and then it became really personal, and her fight for justice and has gone straight to the political ring. She said she was just going to do what she can to help make changes where basically in politics. That's her goal. Cha-Cha was always seen as the mom. She's the mom of the group. So all these individuals that have passed away or have survived, Cha-Cha she did hip hop night there at the Pulse nightclub, and so everybody knew Cha Cha. She would host these hip hop nights, and everybody would come. Cha Cha knew everybody. So when the incident happened, she knew most of the people that had passed away, and everybody leaned on her because she was kind of like, she's the mother of the group. And so her flight for justice and her calling came from being the voice of those individuals. Anybody, y'all want to add anything else? I'm missing.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right, because something that happens, and she, I mean, if you watch the documentary, she's smart as a whip, and she doesn't have a filter. She will speak her mind, and she was the perfect person to be there for those that were in shock and couldn't handle what was going on. But the flip side of that, which on our 5-year anniversary, was there for her. Like all the fights, battles she's gone into for everybody but herself. Truly, everyone but herself. And she's fighting, and she's going to war, and Robin's doing the same thing. They're making a voice, they're creating a thing. But who's there for her? Because everyone's like, yes, we all rely on Cha Cha. Who's there for Cha Cha? Like, she needs support too. I don't know if you talked about this earlier, but we talked about like survivor doesn't just mean the person that was there that night. It's the aunt that lost her nephew. It's Cha Cha who lost many friends and needs the story to be told. These people need support. They really do. And this was so horrific. And I know that so much has happened since then with mass shootings, and it's just disgusting. But yeah, we need to support these people. And I went on a tangent again. Sorry, my phone keeps making noise. Oh, dinner.
Oh, you're fine. I think one thing that this documentary kind of really showed me as a viewer is that there is kind of, as we were talking about earlier, once the media storm settles, there is a really a lack of justice for those that experience this and the families. And I would imagine kind of working on a project that is telling these types of stories, that there has to be some level of frustration. And I'm wondering how working on this film has kind of changed you guys as individuals and people, not just filmmakers, coming into a project like this and then coming out of it.
Every day.
When that project was brought to me as a mom, I knew that I had to fight and let their voices be heard. I remember sitting on the 8 hours each day we were shooting the interviews and stuff, and the emotions were raw. Coming home and just crying at night. How can I fix it? I can't fix it. As a mom, you want to fix it. You want to find a solution. But this one I couldn't fix. All I could do was allow them to tell their stories, and then I would come home and I would just cry and cry and cry. And so that to me is was very heartbreaking. But I've always, even raised my kids, you love everybody no matter what color, what sexuality they are. You love everybody for who they are, and that's the way we live life, and so I've just grown for a bigger, I guess a stronger bond for humanity, and just want to love people more, after working on this project. Maybe make someone's day a little bit better each time I touch someone's life.
It's funny because Nancy and I have been in the trenches for so many years on this project. And then when Julie came on board, we were so grateful because she had the heart to understand this and the scope to understand this. But oh my gosh, I do not envy her having to sit there and go through these painful, like a third of this stuff doesn't even end up on the screen. Like leading up to what we had to make this a viable project. Oh my gosh, Julie. I mean,
it's probably about a quarter of the footage, at least a quarter.
And and the journey you go through, and to find, it's got to be hard. And I'm a rudimentary editor. I'm not Julie by any means, but got 20 minutes of this incredible story, and you want the story to be told, but you know that the mentality of most viewers isn't going to sit through it. So what do we put up there? This much. So that's got to be gut-wrenching, because you need to tell this whole story, but if you tell the whole story, you're going to lose the audience, and it's a really slippery slope, fine line. We need to make a product that will be watched. Do we want to be 100% truthful about the whole story? Yes, we do. But is that going to get in front of enough faces where it makes a difference? And that landed on Julie's lap. And I don't envy her for that, but boy, she did a good job. Like, she found the nuggets that brought home the key elements of this story to humanize it. And if the people that don't understand an alternative lifestyle, maybe we can get them to watch it, and maybe get them to open their eyes a little bit and be like, oh, those are humans too. And you were talking about justice as well. You can't get justice for someone that's been massacred like this. Sorry, I'm jumping, but you keep saying justice, and I hear you, and gosh, I wish justice could be served, but you can't in this arena. There's no, things need to change. I'll be quiet now. Sorry, guys.
One of the things in storytelling is trying to, as you started to say, find something that will be engaging and keep the audience engaged. And having, we haven't really screened this publicly at all. There's been a work in progress that was screened, and there was a very, very small showing. And what people don't realize is, if you don't stick with it, it's very heavy. The idea of how we opened it, as you said, we established what the place was, and we established what happened, what took place. And then we start telling the stories of these survivors. But one of the things that was really important to me is to not make it all about the death. So as we progressed in the storylines, I wanted to make sure that we were expressing some of the conflict, like the fact that there is this difference. People have a different perception of what family is. And then there was the story about where Demetrius is telling about running into a bum on the street that he didn't want to give money to. What an amazing story. What an uplifting, heartfelt story. And he told it so eloquently. So there's a lot of positivity that comes out of this as we continue to move forward, towards the end. In the last segment of that first section there, where we ended on Keon telling his, we're going to keep surviving and keep surviving and keep surviving. All those people, and where you mentioned Ken Kidd, who was the Gays Against Guns, most of those were positive interactions and people being there for other people. So that was a very positive way to try and wrap things. And when we decided to go back and revisit the 5 years later, it was like, wow. That was like this whole other world where, here we've been moving towards this positivity, and yet there's some really good things happening, but some things are still standing still or going backwards in the case of losing funding for the survivors to get mental health. So, and back to what you were saying about hard to watch this stuff every day. I mean, I saw this thousands of times. And I had to research stories and watch all these news stories that were out there and hear over and over about the people who had died. It was very hard, and having to take little breaks for myself to kind of regroup. But how this has changed me, I don't know that it's changed me necessarily so much as it has brought more of that type of work into my life. Not seeking it out, but it has just come to me, a small project about another hate crime that was very difficult to hear about. Some other things like disenfranchised Black people, how they need to be heard, their voices need to be heard and get their stories told. So, and I guess I just really welcome that opportunity to help people, like you guys just said.
Yeah, biggest heart. Julie is the only editor. She took it and made it hers, and it's so grateful. So grateful.
Thank you.
I think so much of what you guys do, echoing the stories of this small group of people and allowing them to speak volumes, connect with people that may have also endured, so have a lot of exploration of the like homophobia and like bigotry towards the LGBT community, and specifically the film addresses like that there's like discommunication from like the Black church if you're found out to belong to the LGBT community, which I didn't actually know of, so I thought that was fascinating. But also I think perhaps the saddest portion of that section of the film is where Ramis talks about like basically being discommunicated from his own country for being LGBT.
Yeah, Ramses was put up as the poster boy for what not to do and what you will be murdered for. And he was like, it was shocking. When he told that story, I was shocked. Nancy?
Yeah, his brother is also in the LGBT community, and they had to unfriend on Facebook and separate themselves because his brother was in Honduras at the time, and so he was afraid that they would link back to him as a target and to be killed, and as well as the phone call that he got from his father when all the news came out and he was the poster boy in Honduras. His father called him up and said, basically just disowned him on the phone and said, good luck. And, basically you're no longer my son.
And he just lost all of his friends on his birthday. Like it's inhuman to me. I don't get it.
Well, I think my last question for listeners is obviously goes to the distribution. We've spent the last like half hour or so talking about this movie. When can people actually see it? Like, what are the plans for getting this in front of more eyes?
Currently we're on the film festival circuit, so we're waiting. We've just submitted to a ton of film festivals, and so we'll know then when we get picked up. We're also in, fingers crossed, negotiations with a network, and we're waiting to hear back. It's like when you take it to pitch, it's made it to the next couple of rounds, so we're still waiting to hear about that. They're supposed to be reaching back out soon. So right now we're in the sales and distribution part of it, and that's what, as filmmakers, that's kind of the process it takes, and we're hoping soon we could be blasting this out everywhere so everybody can see it.
Well, until then, my last question for you guys is, where can people find more information specifically about the movie, but also at the same time, if there are any resources out there that you guys know of that may relate to the film and or someone who may have gone to similar events that the film covers?
Well, hashtag We Exist is something that was born out of this. I don't know if you guys covered that. And the rest Nancy can handle.
Our webpage is pulse-documentary.com. So you can follow our updates there. You can also follow us on Facebook. It's the same thing, Pulse Documentary. So you can check it out on Facebook. We'll put all of our updates there. And what was the other question?
Is there any like resources that you guys might be aware of that might help people that find themselves or are currently going through something similar that the subjects of this documentary went through?
Was Keon able to create the space that he was going for in Orlando?
Not as he's working on that.
Working on it. Okay.
Yeah, Keon is out of this is trying to find design an LGBT youth center, and to get that a nonprofit youth center in Orlando, so there'd be a common safe zone for LGBT youth. He's still working on that. It's more his working on his recovery to get there. As for any kind of resources, unfortunately, some of the resources that stemmed out of this, how do we politically correct say, unfortunately, the resources that stemmed out of here, we don't personally support because of things we've seen in the background, and that the funds haven't truly gone to all the survivors. So it's kind of hard for us to pitch those that were born from Pulse because of a little bit of background information that we've seen come to light in the background when doing the documentary.
Yeah, and that also goes back to the original title, Forgotten Survivors. So this horrendous thing happened. All of a sudden, you've got all these foundations and to us, and let's help everybody. It was a flash in the pan. The people that needed help didn't get help. So that's tough to answer, and I hate to say that because it shouldn't be.
Fair. Well, maybe we're going to offer you guys our mental health resource library to anyone out there that is struggling.
Perfect.
Maybe you guys can find something there. Links are going to be in the descriptions below. Alexa, Julie, Nancy, thank you guys so much for screening Surviving Pulse, Life After a Mass Shooting for us here tonight. And thank you guys for answering questions and talking about this film. I wish you guys the best of luck, and keep your eyes out for Surviving Pulse, Life After a Mass Shooting. Have a good night, guys.